Some wounds aren't carved by death. They're carved by the people you raised, the people you fed, the people you trusted with your whole, quiet life. Judith Mercer had spent decades building something she believed would hold her in old age, a home, a family, a sense of belonging. Then Walter got sick, and in the span of a few weeks, everything she thought was hers began dissolving. The property, the decisions, her very place at the table of her own life. What remained was a scrap of land her father had left behind. A forgotten workshop she'd never once been allowed to enter as a child. Nobody thought twice about it, but that forgotten place, dismissed, overlooked, written off, held something no one expected. Not just property, an answer, to a silence that had lasted an entire lifetime. It started on a morning like any other. Walter Mercer collapsed from a stroke on a Thursday at the end of September. He went down in the aisle between paint cans and power tools in the building supply store where he'd stood for 30 years. A delivery worker found him, a boy barely 2 weeks into the job. The kid ran to the parking lot to call Daniel. Judith got the news over the phone. She was sorting through old books in the reading room of the high school where she'd retired less than a year before. The doctors said Walter was lucky. The stroke didn't kill him, didn't fully steal his speech or his legs, but it stole the thing that had always kept this family locked in its familiar order. The presence of a man everyone waited for before making a single decision. After that, shifts came slowly, almost gently. Daniel began showing up at the hospital more often, speaking with doctors, holding the thick file, answering for his father faster than his father could answer for himself. Elaine drifted in each afternoon, hot coffee, soft perfume, phone in hand, perching at the foot of Walter's bed. Then the comments slipped out like notes tucked under a door. "Mom, don't worry. Daniel can handle everything." Or, "For now, just let him take care of it." Clean, smooth. Judith didn't push back. In those early days, she was genuinely too drained to push back. She rose at 5 each morning, drove to the hospital, sat beside Walter's bed listening to the steady pulse of the heart monitor. Then home, laundry, a few phone calls from acquaintances, the growing pile of mail and bills on the kitchen table. By evening, a fast bowl of soup in front of news that didn't register. Sleep on the sofa with reading glasses still pressed against her face. It was inside those grinding, exhausting weeks that the paperwork started appearing. First, a temporary power of attorney, so Daniel could manage the store accounts while Walter healed. Then papers transferring check-signing authority. Then came the sheets Daniel placed in front of his mother. That calm voice. The tone of someone explaining something necessary to a child. Judith asked a few questions. Daniel gave answers shaped precisely to stop further asking. Or maybe she simply didn't have the strength to press until the end. Walter came home at the beginning of November, walking slowly, left hand still weak, mouth pulling slightly crooked when he spoke too fast. From that point forward, the store belonged almost entirely to Daniel. Walter sat in the living room armchair more than he sat in the small office behind the checkout counter. He watched the news, dozed, sometimes asked how sales went that week. Daniel always answered, brief, firm, then drove off before dinner. And Judith began noticing small changes inside her own home. The shared checkbook vanished from the kitchen drawer. Her credit card was declined once at the supermarket. The system was being updated, they said. The sedan she'd always driven to church, the library, the grocery store. Daniel gently suggested she keep it in the garage, for safety. The weather was changing. Roads would be slippery, no longer suitable for an elderly person. Judith heard those words on a bitter evening in early winter. The whole family had gathered for dinner at Daniel's house. The dining table stretched long and dark, its wooden surface polished to such a shine that each plate clinked faintly against it when set down. Elaine sat to the right, slicing her chicken into careful, even pieces. Daniel's daughter played in the next room, the muffled sound of a cartoon bleeding through the door until Heather pulled it shut. Daniel was the first to set down his fork. That small motion always carried weight. It meant something was coming. __quote_6___. His gaze fixed straight ahead, though his tone stayed soft. Judith glanced up from her mashed potatoes. Walter sat at the head of the table, hands resting in his lap, eyes fixed on his napkin. Judith waited for him to speak. He didn't. Daniel went on. The house you're in now, it's too large. Upkeep costs keep climbing. The stairs aren't safe for Dad anymore. Heather and I have already talked it through. For the time being, you and Dad should come stay here with us. Judith lowered her spoon. How long is for the time being? Until things settle. And our house? Elaine chimed in, her voice light, almost helpful. We think it makes sense to rent it out. Or sell if it comes to that. Not immediately, but we should start getting ready. Judith turned toward her husband. Walter. He raised his head clumsily, like a student caught not paying attention. Daniel understands these things better than I do. The sentence was short, nearly harmless, but the room grew colder around it. Daniel reached beneath his chair and pulled a stack of papers from the leather briefcase at his feet. There's something else. Grandpa Elias left that old farm out in Missouri. It's still in your name. The property taxes have barely been covered these last few years. The house is probably falling apart. But if you want somewhere quiet, you could go out there for a while. Country air might do you good. It took Judith several seconds to absorb what he was really saying. You want me to leave my own home? Daniel didn't flinch. __quote_22__. Heather appeared at that exact moment with a plate of bread, as though this were nothing more than an ordinary family meal. Elaine wouldn't meet her mother's eyes. Walter remained frozen in place. And Judith understood. All of this had been decided before she walked through the door. She was the only one who'd shown up late to the story of her own life. What about the money in the account? She asked. Daniel's answer came without pause. __quote_24__. Judith sat motionless for a long time. The dining room clock let out a single dry tick. Beyond the window, the season's last leaves scraped across the stone yard in short, rustling waves. The old Missouri farm surfaced in her mind like a photograph left too long in the sun. A small house, an empty horse stable, the workshop her father had always kept locked, the smell of wood shavings and engine oil and old music, all of it tangled somewhere deep in her memory. Where's the key? Judith asked. Daniel blinked. Key? The farm key? Elaine quickly opened her handbag, dug around for a moment, then placed on the table a small key ring bound with a fraying strip of fabric. They had prepared even that. Judith picked it up. I'll go. Nobody stopped her. Perhaps because every person at that table believed this was surrender. The following morning, Judith opened the wardrobe and pulled out a dark blue suitcase, old and scuffed. She packed a few warm layers, her blood pressure medication, a notebook with a brown cover, her birth certificate, her marriage certificate, a handful of photographs, and a wool scarf her mother had knitted years ago. Everything else she left behind. By midday, Daniel drove her to the long-distance bus station in Springfield. He placed the suitcase on the sidewalk, checked his watch, and said, "Call when you arrive." Judith nodded. She climbed aboard the bus just as a thin rain began to fall. The seats inside carried the smell of old plastic and stale coffee. She sat by the window with her handbag pressed against her lap, watching through the fogged glass as Daniel turned his back before the bus even pulled away. The road leaving the city felt longer than she remembered. Strip malls, gas stations, billboards fading in the grey light, cracked parking lots. Then the buildings thinned and fell away. By late afternoon there was nothing outside but open land. Wooden fences sagging under their own weight, a few flat warehouse roofs, clusters of bare trees standing motionless beneath a sky the color of old tin. When the bus turned onto the narrow road leading to the last town before Missouri, Judith leaned her temple against the cold glass. She didn't sleep. She only closed her eyes, as though darkness could compress the distance. She reached Dawson close to noon the following day. The bus station was a concrete slab beside a convenience store advertising fishing bait, ice, and cigarettes on a hand-painted sign. The driver pulled her suitcase from the luggage compartment, climbed back aboard. The door folded shut. The engine growled, the bus reversed from the curb and vanished around the bend. All it left behind was diesel hanging in the cold air. Judith stood still, adjusted her scarf, then dragged her suitcase into the store. Behind the counter sat a sturdy woman with grey hair wound into a high bun, thumbing through a gardening magazine. Quote, 29, quote, she asked without looking up. Quote, 30, quote. The woman raised her eyes fully. The woman closed the magazine slowly and studied Judith's face, the way someone studies a word they haven't heard spoken in years, trying to remember what it meant. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 35, underscore, underscore. Judith thanked her. She bought a bottle of water and 2 packs of salted crackers, then asked if there was anywhere in town to rent a car or call a taxi. The woman shook her head. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 36, underscore, underscore. Judith pulled her suitcase back into the open air. Wind swept the road. Dry grass and damp earth mingled in it. She had walked more than half a mile when she heard a truck decelerating behind her. An old red pickup crept alongside. The driver was a man in his 60s, dark cloth cap, one hand resting loose on the wheel. Judith stopped. She looked at the empty truck bed, then at him. At her age, caution still lived in her bones, but so did the exhaustion. She opened the door, climbed into the passenger seat, wedged the suitcase between her feet. Quote 40, the man said as the truck rolled forward. Quote 41. Quote 42. He nodded once. Quote 43. Judith turned toward him. Sam gave a faint smile. The road narrowed as they drove. Patchy, frozen pasture land stretched on both sides. Wooden fences broken in places, posts leaning like tired men. Past a low row of elm trees the house appeared. It was smaller than Judith remembered, or perhaps a child's memory inflates everything. The roof sagged at the right corner. 3 porch steps tilted hard to one side. The horse stable behind the house was missing several boards. The long, low workshop beside the house stood silent, its wide door sealed shut, old blue paint curling away in patches. Sam stopped the truck at the gate. Water and electricity have probably both been cut off for a long time, he said. If you plan on staying, I can come back this afternoon, help take a look. Judith gripped the suitcase handle. I don't want to trouble you. It's all right. Around here, the difference between troubling someone and helping each other is only whether people are willing to open the door. He said it the way someone mentions the weather, calm, certain, requiring no response. Judith stepped out of the truck. Weeds brushed the hems of her pants. 6 keys on the ring Elaine had handed her. The third one fit. The front door swung inward and caught halfway, dust thick as carpet on the floor beneath it. The air hit her like opening a sealed coffin. Old wood, old fabric, something that had been locked away from the world far too long. Judith set the suitcase down and forced open every window that would still give. Light flooded in. The small dining table, the old gas stove, 2 straight-backed chairs, and those high kitchen cabinets her mother could never reach, always needing the step stool every single time. She moved through each room slowly. The living room held nothing but a couch draped in a white sheet gone yellow with years. The small bedroom, an iron bed, a thin mattress, a wardrobe with one door hanging crooked. The bathroom had lost its mirror. The faucet gave nothing, not a drop, not a sound. At the end of the hallway, The back door opened onto waterlogged grass and a muddy path leading to the workshop. Judith stood there staring at that workshop door for a long time. In her memory, Elias Porter had almost never brought his daughter inside. He hadn't been harsh about it. He'd just say, "It's messy in here. Let Dad handle it." That was all, but it was enough. A child understands. Some doors in a house exist for work, not for curiosity. She turned away and went back to what needed doing first. By 3 that afternoon, she had wiped down the kitchen table, swept a heap of dry leaves and cobwebs out onto the porch, wrestled 2 windows open, and found a box of matches in a drawer that still struck flame. She tried the stove. Nothing. She tried the light switch. Dead. She took 2 careful sips from the water bottle she'd bought in town, then lowered herself into the kitchen chair to rest her feet. Just before 4, the rumble of Sam's truck rolled into the yard again. He brought 2 large water cans, a paper bag, bread, eggs, smoked sausage, a flashlight, several candles. "Figured you probably hadn't made it back into town yet," he said. Judith stood. "I'll pay you." "Later is fine." He placed everything on the table and glanced around the kitchen once. "House is still solid. Plumbing needs checking. The electrical breaker is probably locked outside at the pole. I know someone at the power company. I'll call them tomorrow." "And the water?" "There's a tank out back, but it hasn't run in a long time. Use what I brought for now. If you need, I can take you over to my place to wash up one evening." Judith pressed her lips together slightly. She was not yet accustomed to accepting help offered this plainly. Sam seemed to notice. He said nothing more, just stepped out onto the porch, checked a few boards gone soft with rot, then came back to the kitchen doorway. "Nights out here are colder than you'd expect. Back bedroom has less draft than the front room. Door locks. I'll come by tomorrow morning." After he left, silence reclaimed the yard. Judith used the can water to wash her face and hands, lit the candles, and fried 2 eggs in an old pan she'd pulled from beneath the sink, ate them with bread. Night came faster than she was ready for. The house sank into pale yellow candlelight, and every wall threw long shadows into every corner. Before she went to the bedroom, Judith took the brown-covered notebook from her suitcase, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote 3 lines. "Turn the electricity back on, check the water, see what is still worth keeping in the workshop." She set the pen down, closed the notebook, picked up the flashlight, and walked down the hallway. At the last window in the house, she stopped. Outside, in the backyard beneath a dark grey sky, the workshop door stood there, dark, still, as though it had never been waiting for anyone through all those years. The next morning, Judith woke before the sun had fully risen, not because she'd slept well. The old house carried a silence so complete it made lying still impossible. Wind found some gap in the roof, caught the window frame and whistled softly, like someone sighing in the next room. She pulled on another sweater, walked to the kitchen, and set the old kettle she'd found in the cabinet on to boil. The water from Sam's can was still ice cold. She brewed instant coffee in a chipped mug, handle snapped clean off, and stood by the back door, drinking it slowly, watching mist settle across the yard. In morning light, everything looked less destroyed than it had the night before. Weeds still choked the ground, the fence still sagged, the horse stable stood hollow, and the workshop remained sealed shut. But the clearness of dawn let Judith trace the path with her eyes. She could see what still held together, what needed to go, what deserved to be left alone a while longer. Sam pulled up just after 7 with a toolbox, a spool of electrical wire, and 2 pastries folded in wax paper. "Already called the power company," he said, stepping down from the truck. "They'll come by late morning. Let me check the water pipes first." They walked together behind the house. The metal rainwater tank was still whole, just needed scrubbing out. Several pipe sections along the exterior wall had cracked open. Sam crouched, turned a shut-off valve, tapped a joint with his knuckle, then told Judith to hold the plastic bucket on the opposite side. 30 minutes later, The kitchen faucet coughed out a stream of brown water. Judith stood watching it pour into the basin as though it were proof she hadn't arrived somewhere too late to matter. By noon, electricity returned. Only part of the house responded. The hallway bulb was dead. The living room outlet flickered and hummed. But the kitchen light came on, yellow, steady, warm. Judith wiped her hands on the kitchen towel, tilted her chin up toward that glow, and turned to Sam. He was slicing an apple with a small folding knife. He smiled. After a simple lunch, toasted bread, sliced apples, Judith walked out to the workshop. The door was heavier than she expected. She tried 5 keys before one fit. The lock released with a dry click. The door shifted inward, dragging a thin sheet of dust down onto the concrete floor. Inside was darkness. Judith stood still, letting her eyes soften and adjust. The first smell she recognized was old wood. Then came machine oil, dried varnish, damp paper, and something very faint beneath it all, something like velvet kept too long in a sealed box. The workshop stretched long and narrow. On the left, a workbench ran the full length of the wall, lined with countless small drawers. On the right, tall wooden shelves held instrument cases, tool chests, glass jars packed with tiny nails, paintbrush bristles, coiled strings. At the far end, a high window let light through a single patch, just enough to show dust floating in the air like thin smoke. Judith crossed to the workbench. On its surface lay a wine-colored felt cloth spread flat, 2 small pliers, a magnifying glass with a brass frame, and an open wooden box holding thin pieces of wood cut with impossible evenness. Her father had sat there for hours. She remembered now the faint sound of filing, drawers sliding open, a dry cough held back behind closed lips. There had been afternoons when her mother called him to dinner 3 times before he answered. Back then, Judith had believed he was simply lost in old things no one else noticed or cared about. In the 4th drawer from the left, she found a stack of hard-bound notebooks tied with cloth string, each labeled by year: 1998, 1999, 2000. She chose one and opened it. This was no scattered note-taking. It was a work log. Dates, customer names, instrument type, condition upon arrival, repairs needed, estimated price, payment received, notes about wood grain, finish quality, cracks, serial numbers. Judith turned more pages, names from St. Louis, Kansas City, even Chicago. A few lines mentioned regional orchestra, private collector, send back after May concert. She set the notebook down and opened the chest near the foot of the bench. Inside, 3 violins wrapped in soft cloth, 1 viola with no strings remaining, and a small box containing certificates, handwritten letters, and payment invoices clipped carefully into separate bundles. A light knock came at the workshop door. Sam was standing there, hat in his hands. Quote 64, quote, he said. Quote 65, quote. Judith held up a fistful of papers. Quote 66, quote. Sam moved closer, peering over her shoulder. Quote 67, Judith held out a letter bearing the letterhead of a small theatre in Columbia. Short and direct, a note of gratitude to Mr. Elias Porter for restoring the cello featured in the autumn performance, along with a proposal for continued collaboration on 2 additional instruments early the following year. Quote 68, Judith said. Sam didn't respond right away. He lifted a small wooden box from the table, rubbed the dust from its lid with his thumb, then placed it back. Men your father's age, most of them never learned to talk about what they could do. They just did it. Figured the work spoke for itself. Judith kept digging through the records until late afternoon. Inside a metal cabinet, held shut by a latch, she uncovered more insurance documents, bank receipts, an envelope holding 3 small keys, and a bundle of papers with the heading Porter Workshop Holdings. Underneath all of it sat a copy of the land ownership certificate. It was registered under a trust. The sole beneficiary, Judith Porter Mercer. She read every line twice. Not Walter's name. Not both of them together. Not split among the children for later. Hers. Hers alone. By the time the light outside began to fade, Judith had organized 3 distinct piles: work logs, customer letters, and legal records. She carried them inside, set them on the kitchen table in neat rows, then pulled out the brown-covered notebook and added more lines. Call a lawyer in town. Find someone to appraise the instruments. Check the trust. Her pen was still forming the last word when the landline telephone in the kitchen rang. The sound stopped her cold. She had assumed that line died years ago. Judith lifted the receiver. Elaine. ___quote_70___. Her voice ran softer than usual. Honeyed. Careful. ___quote_71___. Judith glanced at the stack of documents spread across the table. ___quote__72____quote__. _73__quote__74____. A pause on the other end. 1 beat too long. __quote_75___. Judith turned toward the kitchen window. The sky was dimming. The backyard dissolved slowly into soft grey. __76_, she said. __77_. Monday morning, Judith drove Sam's old pickup into town. He'd left the keys on the kitchen table before dawn, along with a note in scratchy handwriting. __78__. Judith read it, folded the paper, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She had never driven an automatic this old. The dashboard rattled with every gear change, but the engine turned over. The heater still blew warm. That was enough. Martha Bell's office occupied the 2nd floor of a brick building near the post office. The brass nameplate hung slightly off-center. The wooden stairs groaned beneath Judith's weight. Inside, the waiting room barely fit a fabric couch, a magazine rack, and a houseplant drowning in its own pot. Martha Bell looked to be in her 50s, short hair, thin-framed glasses, an ash-grey sweater that had seen many seasons. She worked through the entire stack Judith brought, interrupting only twice, once to ask for a precise date, once to tell Judith to hold on while she marked a passage in the file. When she finished, Martha removed her glasses and set her pen down flat. Quote 79. Judith met her eyes. Quote 80. Quote 81. Martha slid the trust document across the desk until it sat directly in front of Judith. Judith rested her hand on the edge of the desk. Martha opened the work log folder a second time. Martha straightened in her chair. Quote 85. Martha held her gaze a moment longer. Quote 87. Quote 88. Martha's lips curved slightly, as though that answer pleased her. That afternoon, Judith walked into the town bank and opened an account under her own name. The first deposit was what remained in her wallet, and a small check she had found in the workshop, still valid, written by a community theatre paying her father from the last year he was still working. The teller examined it carefully, said it would take a few days to clear. Judith stepped out onto Main Street just as the church bell rang 3 times. She walked into the diner on the corner, ordered chicken soup and hot tea. At the next table, 2 farmers debated livestock feed prices. At another, 3 older women discussed the school and the weekend football game. Nobody looked at Judith for long. The feeling was unfamiliar and pleasant. Here she was not Daniel Mercer's mother, not Walter Mercer's wife, just a woman eating lunch alone. When she returned to the farm, Sam was on the porch replacing a rotten board. "What did the lawyer say?" he asked without looking up. "My father did not leave behind a pile of worthless junk the way I always assumed." Sam hammered the last nails, stood, dusted his hands. "Good. I still need an appraiser. There's a man in Colombia, Andrew Cole. I once drove my cousin to see him about selling an old mandolin." Sam looked at Judith. "Want me to take you?" "The lawyer said she'd call him first. If he agrees, I'll go." Sam nodded. No further questions. The matter rested there. 3 days later, Andrew Cole came to the workshop himself. Thin, wearing a dark overcoat, carrying cloth gloves, a magnifying glass, a small camera, and a thick black notebook. He moved slowly from shelf to shelf, opened each instrument case, examined each label through the F-holes, photographed serial numbers, compared them against the papers Judith provided. For nearly 2 hours he said almost nothing. Only short remarks. "Leave this as it is. This one, the bridge has been replaced. The varnish is good. The insurance papers still carry reference value." It was not until the 6th viola that he set down the magnifying glass and turned to face her. "Your father worked very carefully. I'm beginning to understand that." Andrew nodded slowly. "Not only carefully, reputably. These letters show that people trusted his craftsmanship, and these instruments," he paused, choosing his words, "they are not National Museum pieces or anything of that nature, but they hold real value, collectible value, performance value, the value of the accompanying documentation as well. Enough to repair this house and live in peace. Enough if you don't sell too quickly and don't let anyone push the price down." Andrew placed the violin back into its case. Closed the lid gently. Taken as a whole, the instruments, the restoration records, the ownership rights to the workshop, certain related professional assets, I cannot give a final figure today, but I can tell you this: you are not poor. Late that same afternoon, the landline in the kitchen rang again. This time, Daniel. "You opened a new account in Dawson?" he asked immediately. No greeting, no pretense. Judith sat down in the chair and pulled the notebook closer. "Are you calling to check on me, or to check up on me?" "I'm calling because things are starting to become unclear." "Unclear to whom? You've been gone for weeks." "Then a lawyer in Missouri calls my office, wanting papers connected to the trust. After that, the bank sends your new address confirmation to the old house. I just need to understand what's happening." Judith picked up her pen. On the blank page, she wrote a single line. "Do not answer when they speak in the voice of someone who owns you." Her words into the phone came slow, deliberate. "What is happening is that I am finally reading the things I should have read years ago." 3 days later, a summons arrived. The envelope had been tucked into the mailbox by the gate. It sat between the electric bill, a livestock feed flyer, and the bank letter confirming her new account was active. Heavy paper, sharp corners, her name printed in full, exactly right: Judith Porter Mercer. The return address read Sangamon County Court, Illinois. She carried it into the kitchen, set it on the table, used the tip of a letter opener to slice the edge, the same way she once opened overdue library fee notices back when she was still working. What was inside was so brief it felt like a slap, delivered in a whisper. Daniel Mercer and Elaine Mercer had filed a petition requesting an evaluation of their mother's capacity to manage her own finances. The grounds listed were precise and bloodless: living alone on a deteriorating property far from family, displaying signs of unusual decisions regarding assets, being under the influence of outsiders. Judith read the document once, then again. Not a single sentence directly said she was losing her mind. Not one word sounded crude. Everything had been written in that clean, measured, polite language, the kind that would make anyone uninvolved believe this was a deeply responsible act by caring children. She folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, set it neatly on the table. Then she called Martha Bell. Quote, 106, quote, the lawyer said. Martha arrived within 40 minutes. She carried a file case, a tablet, and an expression that held zero surprise. She read the petition in silence, turned each page, tapped her finger lightly against the table's edge. I expected something like this, she said. Not enough basis to win, but enough to create trouble and force you to explain yourself. Explain what? That I restored electricity, repaired the house, had papers appraised, paid every bill on time? You do not need to convince me. Martha looked up. What they are doing is not exactly questioning whether you are clear-minded. They are testing whether you are tired enough to surrender. Judith turned toward the window. Sam was out in the yard, bent over, measuring the fence section by the gate again. He was setting a new post with the calm patience of a man who worked before anyone else could think of a reason not to. I do not intend to surrender. Good. Martha opened her file case. We need 3 things. First, current medical records and an independent cognitive evaluation. Second, every document from the day you arrived here. Third, a clear statement explaining the origin of the Missouri assets. Not long, but airtight. I'll handle the legal documents. You handle the rest better than most clients I've represented. That afternoon, Judith drove to Columbia for the appointment Martha had arranged. The evaluation lasted over an hour. Recall 3 words and repeat them later. Draw a clock face. Count backward. Explain why she had relocated to Missouri. Describe how she had managed money since the start of the month. Name who was assisting her, whom she had hired, what she had paid for. Judith answered everything, not fast, but clean. The doctor was a middle-aged black woman with a gentle voice and very sharp eyes. When it was finished, she closed the file. Are you tired? Yes. Are you confused? No. Then those 2 things ought to be properly distinguished. The results reached Martha's office the following morning. While she waited, Judith organized every paper into separate stacks. Electric bills, materials for the porch roof repair, gas receipts, the bank confirmation letter, Andrew Cole's preliminary appraisal, the trust documents, the deed of land use rights, the receipt for water pipe repairs, and a notebook, her own, where she had recorded every single expense since the first day. Sam brought her a cardboard file box with a handle. Easier to carry to court than plastic bags, he said. Judith took it. You always seem to prepare the exact thing I haven't considered yet. Sam pulled out a chair and settled across from her. No. I just anticipate what kind of trouble people intend to cause. For the first time since she'd come to the farm, Judith asked him something personal. __, quote, _124, __. Sam went quiet. Long enough that Judith thought he might let the question dissolve into the air between them. But then he spoke. Quote, 125, quote, 126, quote, 127, quote, 128, quote, 129, quote, 130, quote, 131. His gaze drifted toward the porch. __, quote, _, 132, __. Judith said nothing more. Another person's story, told in the right measure, does not require the listener to fill silence just to prove compassion. 2 days before the hearing, Elaine appeared. She drove a rented SUV, wore flat shoes instead of heels, a cream-colored knit coat, her hair gathered neatly at the nape of her neck. She stood on the porch for several seconds before knocking, as if she wasn't certain she had the right to be there at all. Judith opened the door. __, quote, _133, __. Elaine followed her mother into the kitchen, her eyes moving over a house already different from what she'd imagined. The floor had been scrubbed clean, fresh curtains hung in the windows. A pale blue checkered cloth covered the kitchen table. On the shelf sat a few small potted plants, one Sam had brought over and helped her root into soil. "You really have done a lot here," Elaine said. "Sit down." Judith poured tea into 2 cups. Neither woman reached for hers right away. Elaine wrapped both hands around the handle. "I didn't want things to go this far. You still signed your name. Daniel said it had to be done to protect you. He said people were influencing you." Elaine raised her eyes, looking directly at her mother for the first time since stepping inside. "Are people influencing you?" "Yes," Judith said. "My own children." Elaine bit her lip. Her eyes reddened fast, but this time Judith did not believe these were tears deployed at the right moment. "I know you're angry. That's behind me now." Judith set her cup down. "What I need is not a graceful apology. I need the truth." Elaine sat motionless. Only after a long silence did she speak. "Daniel found out you opened a separate account. He called the bank in Illinois and asked about old transactions. They wouldn't give him anything. He thought you'd found something here, and then he started talking about how if you were no longer fully capable, the family needed to step in and manage things. I told him that was going too far. He said I was soft-hearted." Her voice shrank on the exhale. "I still signed." Judith listened to every word. "On the day of the hearing, will you tell the truth?" Elaine stared at the table. "If I'm asked, I won't lie." "That is not enough." She looked up. "If you know something is wrong, you have to say it yourself, before anyone asks." Elaine nodded, very slowly. When she rose to leave, darkness had nearly settled. Judith walked her daughter to the porch. The wind blew colder than usual through the empty yard. Elaine stopped on the last step and turned back. She said, "If all this passes, will you still want to see us?" Judith kept her hand on the doorframe. "Tomorrow I'm driving up to Illinois," she said. "The rest can wait until after the hearing." The hearing began at 9 in the morning, in a small courtroom behind the civil hallway of the Sangamon County Courthouse. Judith arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a dark grey knit dress, a wool coat buttoned high at the neck, and carried the cardboard file box Sam had given her. Martha Bell walked beside her, one arm holding her briefcase, her steps measured, neither hurried nor slow. They did not speak much. At the courtroom door, Martha turned and asked a single question. "Do you remember how you need to answer?" Judith nodded. "Exactly what is asked. No more, no less." Daniel was already inside. He sat on the left side bench with his lawyer, dark blue tie, hair combed smooth, face tight but straining to hold that familiar, calm expression. Elaine sat one seat away from him. Walter had come too. He looked visibly older after only a few months, sitting upright but exhausted, both hands pressed flat against his knees, like a man who had forgotten what hands were for. The judge was a woman in her 60s, voice precise and unhurried. She reviewed the file briefly, then raised her eyes. "This is a petition requesting an evaluation of Mrs. Judith Mercer's financial management capacity and civil decision-making ability. The petitioning side may present first." Daniel's lawyer rose. He spoke smoothly, very clean words. Quote, 164, quote, 165, quote, 166, quote, 167, quote, 168. Judith sat, listening, both hands resting on the file box. If someone had walked in, not knowing the full story, they might have mistaken her for a woman who had recently lost her grip on the world. When it was Martha Bell's turn, she did not stand right away. She opened her briefcase, pulled out 3 sets of papers, already marked. Only then did she begin. "Your Honor, our response is very simple. First, Mrs. Judith Mercer completed an independent medical evaluation 5 days ago. It confirmed full cognitive ability, memory, planning capacity, decision-making ability. She placed a copy on the clerk's desk. Quote, 172. Quote, 173. Quote. The judge turned toward Judith. Judith stood. She paused. Martha handed the file box to the court clerk. The judge turned several pages, reading the marked sections quickly. She paused at the medical evaluation, then at the preliminary report from the appraisal expert. Quote, _182, A man seated in the back row stood. Andrew stepped forward, was sworn in, then confirmed that he had personally inspected the Missouri property, compared the ownership documents and professional records, and concluded that Judith Mercer fully understood what she owned, what she was doing, and had chosen a careful, deliberate management approach. The opposing lawyer asked several follow-up questions, trying to steer the story toward the idea that someone else was guiding her. Andrew answered calmly. Quote, 183. On the left side bench, Daniel shifted in his seat. The judge turned to Elaine. Quote, 184. Elaine pressed both hands together. After a moment she stood. Her voice was quiet at first, but it did not shake. She swallowed. She paused for a beat. The courtroom went silent. Daniel's lawyer leaned slightly toward her, but Elaine did not sit down. I should have said that sooner, she continued. The judge closed the file. The court finds no basis to continue this petition. The medical record is clear. The asset management conduct is consistent. The source of the assets is lawful and has been fully explained. A breath. The petition is dismissed. The sound of the clerk's pen tapping the desk was very soft. Daniel never turned toward his sister. Walter remained motionless, gaze locked on the tiled floor. In the hallway, Martha took Judith's hand and shook it firmly. You performed better than most clients I have ever stood beside. Thank you. No. A thin smile crossed Martha's face. Thank your father. He kept everything filed with remarkable care. Andrew said his goodbye and departed first. Elaine emerged last. She stopped roughly 2 steps from her mother, as though she still hadn't figured out the proper distance between them. Mom. Judith met her daughter's eyes. Go home with your father. And Daniel, whatever your brother carries from this,